Alexander Hamilton was 35 years old, a tech millionaire with a net worth of about $300 million. At first glance, people might think his life was perfect. And yes, it was, but even roses have thorns. When he was 9 years old, his parents suddenly took him to a small, faraway town in Oregon. They dropped him off in front of his grandfather's old wooden house. He stood still on the porch, holding tightly to the worn suitcase his mother had pushed into his hands that morning. The cold countryside air cut through his clothes. It smelled like dry grass and red dirt from the fields. His parents rang the doorbell a few times, then left quickly, as if they were just passing through. Their truck drove down the dusty road and didn't stop or look back. Their last words were short. "We need time to settle our work." He believed them, but a small voice inside him asked, "They're not coming back, are they?" A moment later, the door creaked open. His grandfather, Malachi Hamilton, stood there. He was tall and serious, but his hands were warm when he pulled Alexander into a tight hug. "Come inside, kid," he said in a low, rough voice that somehow felt safe. Alexander dragged his suitcase across the doorway, his heart heavy. The small house smelled old. There was the bitter scent of coffee and the soft smell of burning wood from the fireplace. Malachi showed him a small attic room. An old bed sat there with a thick wool blanket on top. A window looked out onto a wide, empty field. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, trying to picture his parents' faces in the dark. "They'll come back, won't they?" he wondered. But only the cold wind answered him, sneaking through the cracks in the window. In the days that followed, Alexander lived like a shadow. He barely spoke, never smiled, and only gave short answers to his grandfather. But Malachi never forced him to talk. Every morning, he got up early. The sound of the coffee maker echoed through the kitchen before he went outside to the stables. Alexander would sit quietly at the kitchen table, nibbling the slightly burnt toast Malachi made. His heart felt empty. He missed the city, the traffic, even the loud arguments between his parents. At least back then, he had them. Now it was just him, his grandfather, and the quiet of the countryside. One afternoon, he saw Malachi in the backyard, working on an old harvesting machine. Sweat rolled down his forehead, and his hands were covered in grease. But when he saw Alexander, his eyes lit up. "Come here, Alexander. Try holding this wrench." Alexander hesitated. Then he stepped closer, his small hands shaking as he took the heavy tool. Malachi showed him how to tighten a bolt. His voice was steady and calm. "You can do it. Just give it a try." Alexander was clumsy. He struggled, but finally the bolt turned into place. Malachi laughed, loud and proud. "Well done. You've got a knack for this." For the first time in a long while, Alexander felt a little better inside. But when night came, the fear returned. In his dreams, he saw his parents standing at the end of a dusty road. He ran toward them, screaming, but they disappeared like smoke. He woke up in sweat, his shirt soaked through. In the dark, he wondered, "Who am I really? A child left behind. A burden to my grandfather." He wanted to ask Malachi if he truly wanted him there. But he was afraid. Afraid the answer would be no. Time passed, and slowly, Alexander got used to life on the farm. His grandfather never talked about his parents, but he always found ways to pull Alexander out of his sad thoughts. Every day, he gave Alexander small jobs, feeding the horses, picking up eggs, fixing the fence. "Work makes you stronger, Alexander," Malachi said. His eyes were serious but kind. Alexander didn't really understand, but he did the work. He wanted to make his grandfather proud. One day, Malachi took him to an old shed behind the house. It was full of tools, machines, and dusty circuit boards. "This is where I used to create," Malachi said. He pointed to a workbench full of wires and little lights. He told Alexander how he used to be an engineer, building things people thought were impossible. "You could do it too if you want," he said. Alexander didn't believe him. He was just a 9-year-old boy. What did he know about engineering? But Malachi didn't give up. He started teaching him small things. How to connect wires, how to use a soldering iron, how to read simple circuit diagrams. Alexander made a lot of mistakes, but Malachi never got mad. "If you make a mistake, you fix it, Alexander. No one's great at the start." Those words felt like fresh air. Slowly, Alexander began to enjoy those afternoons in the shed. It was just him, Malachi, and the smell of warm metal and melted solder. One evening, Malachi finally talked about Alexander's parents. He didn't say much, just a few words. They have their own paths, Alexander. But you're not them. You're you. Alexander wanted to ask why they had left him, but he stayed quiet. He was too scared of the answer. He just nodded and took the flashlight Malachi handed him. They worked on a small circuit together. When the little light turned on, Alexander smiled. It was the first real smile in months. Malachi patted his shoulder. See, you can do it. When Alexander turned 12, Malachi signed him up for a robotics club at the local high school. Alexander was the youngest one there. The older kids were taller and more experienced. He was nervous and didn't want to look foolish. But Malachi told him, "Just try, Alexander. You're not less than anyone else." Alexander brought home a big box of parts and spent hours in the shed, building and programming. Malachi sat nearby, watching quietly. He didn't interrupt. When Alexander asked for help, he just nodded. "You're doing great," he said. Alexander felt a little taller each time he heard those words. When he turned 14, he entered a statewide robotics competition. His robot could pick up trash by itself. It was the result of everything he and Malachi had worked on together. The night before the contest, Alexander couldn't sleep. He was shaking with fear. Malachi sat with him at the kitchen table, making hot cocoa. "You've done your best. That's what matters. Not the result. What matters is you didn't give up." Alexander looked at him, this man with silver hair and a kind smile, and knew he didn't want to disappoint him. On the day of the competition, Alexander stood in the crowd, his heart pounding. When his robot passed every challenge and was announced as the champion, he could hardly believe it. He ran outside and called his grandfather. "I won," he shouted into the phone. Malachi laughed loudly, his voice full of emotion. "I knew you could do it." That evening, Malachi threw a small party at the farm. Just a few neighbors, a homemade cake, and music from an old radio. Alexander sat on a wooden bench, watching everyone laugh and talk. His heart filled with a warm feeling he hadn't known before. He realized that even without his parents, he had a family, his grandfather, the farm, and the people who believed in him. But deep inside, he still wondered, why didn't his parents want him? That question stayed in his heart like an unhealed wound, waiting for the day he would be brave enough to face it. In the years after his victory at the robotics competition, Alexander felt a new kind of strength inside him. He was no longer the shy boy who sat quietly in the back of the class. At school, people started calling him the robot kid, half teasing, half admiring. He didn't mind. Every day after school, he rushed back to the farm and went straight to the shed, where he and his grandfather worked on new projects. Malachi taught him more advanced programming, how to improve designs, and how to handle failure. "Every mistake is a lesson, Alexander," Malachi said one afternoon while holding a wrench. His eyes sparkled like a child's. Alexander nodded, though sometimes he wanted to smash everything when a circuit burned out. At 16, Alexander began to notice that his grandfather wasn't just an ordinary farmer. There were late-night phone calls, short business trips to the city, and the way Malachi avoided questions. One day, Alexander saw a letter on the kitchen table from a major tech company in Portland. When he asked about it, Malachi just smiled. "Just some old business. Don't worry." Alexander didn't press further, but he knew something was being kept from him. Those days were full of both joy and confusion. He loved life on the farm, the mornings riding horses across the fields, the smell of wood smoke from the fireplace. But the question about his parents was still like a thorn in his chest. He tried not to think about them, but every time he saw a family in town, parents laughing with their children, it made his heart ache. He wondered where they were, what they were doing, and why they had never called or written. Malachi seemed to understand that pain. He never forced Alexander to talk, but he always kept him busy, as if he knew that hard work was the best medicine. At 17, Alexander took on a bigger project, building a robotic arm to help people with disabilities. It was Malachi's idea. "Make something that helps, Alexander," he said one afternoon as they sat on the porch watching the fiery sunset. "Your talent is meant to change lives." Alexander spent almost a year on that project. He missed out on time with friends, but Malachi supported him every step of the way. He helped find research materials and even connected him with an engineer in Portland for advice. When the robotic arm was finally finished, it wasn't just a machine. It was proof of everything they had built together. That project took Alexander to a national science fair in Seattle. For the first time, He left Oregon and stood among hundreds of students from across the country. He felt small and nervous. But as he presented, watching the robotic arm move smoothly, he saw his grandfather's proud face in the crowd. He didn't win first place. He got second. But when he walked off the stage, Malachi hugged him tightly and whispered, "You made me so proud." On the drive home, Alexander fell asleep in the car, his head resting on Malachi's shoulder. He had never felt safer. Then came his 18th birthday. It was a rainy, gray day, cold and quiet. He woke up early to the sound of dishes clattering in the kitchen. The smell of freshly baked cookies filled the air, mixing with the sound of an old song playing on the radio. He smiled, knowing Malachi was planning a surprise like he always did. But something felt different that day. Malachi called him downstairs, his voice more serious than usual. "Alexander, sit with me." Alexander sat across from him at the kitchen table. There was a plate of cookies and a small wooden box. Malachi slid the box toward him, his eyes deep and serious. "Open it." Alexander hesitated. His heart beat fast, though he didn't know why. Inside the box was a simple but beautiful silver ring. The inside of the ring had the word legacy engraved on it. He looked at Malachi confused. "What is it?" Malachi took a deep breath, like he was about to share something very important. "This ring was mine. Now it's yours. It's not just a gift. It's a reminder. Live with purpose and leave a legacy to be proud of." His voice was calm but strong. Alexander slipped the ring onto his finger. It felt heavy, not just on his hand, but in his heart. He wanted to ask more, but Malachi changed the subject and told him to eat the cookies before they got cold. They spent breakfast laughing and sharing old stories, but Alexander couldn't stop looking at the ring. It felt like it carried a secret, a promise he didn't yet understand. That evening, they sat by the fireplace. The room was quiet except for the soft crackling of burning wood. Alexander gathered all his courage. "Grandpa," he said, his voice shaking, "why did my parents abandon me? Why did they leave me with you?" The question he had held in his heart for 9 years finally came out. He was scared Malachi would avoid it. But Malachi looked at him directly, his eyes sad but steady. "Alexander," he began, "your parents weren't bad people, but they were blinded by greed." He spoke slowly, as if it hurt to say the words. "When I was young, your parents tried to take my wealth by forging documents while I was away on business. They thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. I told them I'd give everything to charity. Nothing to them. They were angry. They left. And they left you behind. They only thought of themselves." Alexander sat there in shock. He expected to cry, but instead, he felt anger and pain mixed inside him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Because I wanted you to grow up with hope, not with anger," Malachi said gently. "But now you're old enough to know the truth. And you're old enough to decide what to do with it." He put a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "My wealth, all of it, is yours now. Not because I want it to be, but because you've earned it." Alexander stared at him, confused. Wealth. He had never thought about money. To him, Malachi was just a simple farmer in an old wooden house. When he tried to ask more, Malachi raised his hand and shook his head. "Don't worry about it now. Just live well, Alexander. That's what I want." That night, Alexander lay in bed staring at the ring glinting under the lamplight. It wasn't just a gift. It was a declaration that he belonged. Here, with Malachi, with the farm, and with himself. But deep inside, he sensed a storm brewing. The truth about his parents, the wealth, the ring. These were all pieces of a puzzle he wasn't yet ready to put together. Then autumn came, painting the Oregon sky in bright gold. The ripe barley fields stretched out far and wide, shining under the sun. Malachi and Alexander kept their old routine, riding horses in the early mornings and working on projects in the shed in the afternoons. But Alexander began to notice changes. Malachi moved slower. Sometimes he'd stop in the middle of fixing a machine, resting his hands on his hips, breathing hard. "Getting old, Alexander?" He'd joke when Alexander looked worried. "Just let me rest a bit." Alexander nodded, but deep down he was afraid. Malachi was the only person he had. The idea of losing him made it hard to breathe. One morning, Alexander woke up late. The house was strangely quiet. There was no sound from the kitchen, no pots or pans clattering. He rushed downstairs, calling, "Grandpa?" Silence. His heart pounded as he opened the bedroom door. Malachi was lying on the bed, eyes closed, his face pale. Alexander ran to him, shaking him gently, voice breaking. Grandpa, Grandpa, wake up. But Malachi didn't move. Alexander touched his hand. It was cold. He stood there frozen, like the whole world had stopped. He couldn't even remember how he called 911. All he knew was that when the ambulance came, they told him the truth he didn't want to hear. Malachi had passed away during the night from a stroke. The next few hours were a blur. Alexander sat in the living room, holding the silver ring tightly. Neighbors came in and out, sharing stories. Some talked about how Malachi fixed their tractors for free. Others said he had helped them during tough times with money or advice. Alexander listened, but he couldn't talk. His mind felt empty, stuck on one question. Why, Grandpa? Why did you leave me? The funeral was held at the town's small church, the same one they had gone to every Sunday. The pews were full. Farmers, engineers, and even strangers in suits from the city came. Alexander stood by the casket, looking down at Malachi's calm face. He wanted to scream, to shake him awake, but instead he just stood there, clutching the ring like it was the only thing keeping him whole. While the pastor read prayers, memories of evenings by the fireplace came rushing back. Malachi talking about engineering, patience, and living with purpose. You are my legacy, he had said. Now Malachi was gone, and Alexander didn't know what to do. But he knew one thing. No matter how much it hurt, he had to be strong. That same day, outside in the churchyard, Alexander was thanking people when a sleek black car arrived. The door opened, and he saw them, his parents. They stepped out dressed perfectly, but their eyes gave him chills. His mother walked up first, hugging him tightly. Alexander, I'm so sorry. I've missed you, she whispered. His father stood behind her, quiet, with a hard look on his face. Alexander didn't hug her back. It felt like there was an invisible wall between them. He wanted to believe they were there out of love, maybe regret. But soon they pulled him aside. In a quiet voice, his mother said, Alexander, you're grown now. We should be a family again. Your parents will take care of you. And everything he left behind. Those words, everything he left behind, sent a cold feeling down Alexander's back. He looked at his father, but the man wouldn't meet his eyes. What do you mean? Alexander asked, his voice cold. His mother smiled sweetly, placing a hand on his shoulder. You know your grandfather was wealthy. The farm, the company shares, everything. We need to talk and arrange things. Alexander's heart raced. He pushed her hand away. Malachi hadn't even been buried a full day, and already they were talking about money. I don't have anything to talk about or arrange with you, he said, turning around. But she grabbed his arm, her voice sharper now. Don't be foolish, Alexander. You need your parents. You can't manage that kind of money by yourself. He pulled his arm away and stared at them both. 9 years. You were gone for 9 years. No calls. No letters. And now you show up. Why? For Grandpa's money. His father finally spoke, voice low and angry. Watch your tone, Alexander. We're still your parents. Alexander let out a dry laugh, anger burning in his chest. Parents, you left me when I was 9. Don't pretend nothing happened. And don't think I'm stupid. He walked away without looking back, but his heart felt heavy. He didn't stop them from staying in town. They got a room at a nearby inn. In the days that followed, they kept trying, calling, texting, showing up at the farm. But each time he saw them, Malachi's words echoed in his head. They were blinded by greed. Alexander knew now. They didn't come for him. They came for the money. A part of him was still scared. He was just 18. How could he stand up to them? A week later, he was called to a lawyer's office in Portland. Miss Catherine, Malachi's attorney, welcomed him into a glass-walled room that looked out over the Willamette River. She looked about 50, her hair tied neatly back, eyes sharp but kind. Alexander, she said, handing him a glass of water. Are you ready? He nodded, though his heart was pounding. His parents were there too, sitting across from him. Their faces calm, but they kept glancing at each other. Miss Catherine opened a folder and started reading the will. Her voice was clear and steady, but every line hit Alexander like a blow. Malachi had left everything to him. The farm, the shares in a tech company, other investments. Altogether, more than $100 million. Alexander sat frozen. He couldn't believe it. He had never thought Malachi was that rich. To him, he had just been a farmer in an old flannel shirt, driving an old truck and making coffee every morning. His mother laughed softly, clearly excited. That's wonderful, Alexander. We'll help you manage it. But Miss Catherine raised her hand. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hamilton, she said calmly, but the will is clear. Alexander is legally independent and is the only heir. There are no rules giving either of you guardianship. His father slammed the table, shouting, This is nonsense. We're his parents. Miss Catherine stayed calm. She opened a wooden box and took out a small scanner. To confirm the heir's identity, she said, Malachi requested a scan of the ring. Alexander lifted his shaking hand. The silver ring caught the light. She scanned it. A code popped up on the screen. A perfect match, she said. This ring is the key, Alexander. Malachi encoded it to make sure only you could receive the inheritance. That day, Alexander sat quietly in the lawyer's office, his mother's face pale, and his father yelling. What ring? The old man was insane, but Miss Catherine didn't flinch. She calmly pulled out another document, her voice cold. Furthermore, she said, placing the paper on the table, you both gave up guardianship of Alexander 10 years ago when you signed this. The law doesn't recognize any claim from either of you. The room felt frozen. Alexander looked at his parents. He saw fear and anger in their eyes. His mother tried to speak, but she just stammered. His father stood up and pointed at him. You'll regret this, Alexander. You don't know what you're doing. Alexander didn't answer. He just held the ring on his finger tightly. It wasn't just a gift. It was a shield. His grandfather had given it to protect him from these very people. His parents. As they stormed out, Miss Catherine gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Are you okay, Alexander? He nodded slowly, though inside his chest, his heart felt heavy and broken. He had just been given a fortune, but all he wanted was to hear his grandfather's voice one more time. He looked out the window. His parents were fading into the gray Portland rain. He knew they wouldn't stop, but thanks to his grandfather, he had the strength to face them. The rain kept falling as he left the lawyer's office. The silver ring on his finger felt like it carried the entire world. He drove the old truck back to the farm. His mind raced. $100 million. The number didn't feel like joy. It felt like weight, pressure. To him, his grandfather wasn't a rich man. He was the man who wore flannel shirts, drove an old truck, and taught him how to be a decent human being. Now, Alexander had everything his grandfather had left behind, and parents who would do anything to take it. 2 days later, while he was checking the fence in the west field, a black car stopped at the gate. His father stepped out, dressed in a suit. Mud clung to his shoes. His mother followed, wearing nice clothes, her smile too perfect. Alexander wiped sweat from his forehead. His stomach twisted. Alexander, his mother called, her voice sugary. We need to talk. He crossed his arms. Talk about what? I already said what I needed to say at the lawyer's office. His father stepped closer, his eyes sharp. Don't be foolish, Alexander. You don't know how to handle that kind of money. You need us. If not, you'll lose everything. Alexander let out a dry laugh. Lose everything? Like how you left me 10 years ago. His mother stepped forward. Her voice shook like she might cry. We made a mistake, Alexander. But we're still your parents. You can't just turn your back on us. He looked into her eyes. There was no honesty there. Family doesn't leave their child for money, he said. You didn't come back for me. You came for Grandpa's money. The air felt tight. His father clenched his fists, his voice turning low and threatening. Watch your mouth, Alexander. We can go to the press. Tell everyone you stole the money. Tell them you pushed your parents away. You want the whole town against you. Alexander froze. His heart pounded. The thought of those lies spreading was terrifying. But then he remembered his grandfather's words. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself. He took a deep breath and stepped closer, looking straight at his father. You want to tell stories? Fine. Tell them how you tried to steal from Grandpa. Tell them how you left me when I was 9. No calls. No visits. For 10 years. Go ahead. I'll tell the truth. He pointed to the road. Now leave before I call the police. His mother turned pale. His father looked shocked. They both backed away. They got into the car. Before closing the door, his father looked back. His voice was cold. This isn't over, Alexander. Then they drove off, leaving him in the field, heart pounding. He touched the ring. He felt the word legacy in his skin. They would come back again, but he wasn't afraid anymore. A week later, Alexander was called to the headquarters of his grandfather's tech company in Portland. The building was tall and made of glass, nothing like the quiet farm. Miss Catherine went with him. You need to be there, Alexander, she said. The shareholders want to meet the heir. He wore his only new shirt. He felt out of place among people in suits and high heels. But when he walked into the boardroom, he saw curious, doubtful eyes staring at him. Miss Catherine stood tall beside him. This is Alexander Hamilton, she said clearly. The only heir to Mr. Malachi Hamilton's shares. An older man, the CEO, spoke up. No offense, young man, but you're very young. What are your plans for this company? Alexander took a deep breath. He thought of the evenings by the fireplace, when his grandfather taught him about machines, people, and doing the right thing. I won't promise to be perfect, he said, but I learned from my grandfather. I'll keep this company going with his values, innovation and helping people. The meeting was long, but he saw the eyes around the room begin to change. Doubt turned to interest, then slowly respect. As he stepped out of the room, an employee came rushing up to him. Mr. Hamilton, she whispered, someone is waiting for you in the lobby. They say they're your parents. His heart sank. He walked into the lobby and saw them. His mother, his father, and beside them, a stranger in a gray suit. His father stepped forward, his voice calm but fake. Alexander, this is Mr. Hillary, our lawyer. We've found a way to prove your grandfather's will is invalid. If you don't agree to share the money, we'll take you to court. The man, Mr. Hillary, handed him a pile of papers. You should think about this, he said coldly. A lawsuit could last years. You'll lose a lot. Alexander felt trapped. But then he remembered his grandfather again. Fix a broken machine one step at a time. Don't panic. He looked straight at Mr. Hillary. If you think the will is fake, go to court. But I have the ring, his signature, and the truth. He turned to his parents. These two left me years ago. They don't belong here. His mother shouted, Alexander, how dare you? He didn't stop. He looked at his father and said calmly, You want to fight? Fine. But I'll tell everyone how you forged papers. How you left me when I was 9. The whole world will know who you really are. He pointed to the door. Get out, and don't come back. They just stood there shocked. Mr. Hillary said something under his breath, but Alexander's father raised a hand and stopped him. Without another word, they turned and walked away. As the glass door closed, Alexander exhaled, feeling like he had just survived a storm. Miss Catherine, who had been standing behind him, gently patted his shoulder. You did well, Alexander, she said softly. Malachi would be proud. That night, back at the farm, Alexander couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table and opened the old wooden box his grandfather had left behind. Inside was his journal, the pages yellowed with time. It held stories of his grandfather's life, from the early days building the company to the years he spent raising Alexander. He read quietly, each line pulling him back into memories they had shared. But the last page made his chest tighten with emotion. His grandfather had written, Alexander, you are my hope. If you're reading this, use what I've left you to help others. Build Malachi's hope, a foundation for orphan children like you, so they can learn engineering, science, and find light in the darkness. Alexander sat there in silence. Tears rolled down his face. His grandfather hadn't just left him money. He had left him a mission. The next morning, he called Miss Catherine and told her about his idea to start Malachi's Hope. Her voice smiled through the phone. I was waiting for you to say this, she said. Malachi was sure you would do it for him. Alexander got to work immediately. He reached out to advisors, met with people who had worked closely with his grandfather, and began to plan the foundation. He wanted it to be more than just scholarships. He wanted it to be a place where orphan children felt loved and believed in, just like his grandfather had made him feel. He used part of the fortune to build the foundation's office right there on the farm. He hired a small team. Every day, he worked late into the night, reviewing applications from children in need. As he worked, he often felt like his grandfather was still beside him, guiding him. Not everyone believed in him. Some shareholders in the company doubted him. They said he was too young to handle both the foundation and the business. They encouraged him to sell his shares and let more experienced people take over. But Alexander refused. He remembered his grandfather's words. You are you, Alexander. Don't let anyone tell you you're not enough. So he met with the shareholders. He showed them the foundation's plans and promised to keep the company focused on Malachi's vision. Slowly, some of them began to support him, though not all. One afternoon, Alexander stood in the field behind the farm. He watched as the first children supported by the foundation played in the grass. They laughed and held small robot models he had helped them build. He looked down at the ring on his finger. The word legacy still carved into the metal. It reminded him that he wasn't just continuing his grandfather's work. He was building something of his own. And today, Alexander sat quietly, telling his story. He was a millionaire, yes, but one with deep scars on his heart. A heart that still burned warm and alive. Malachi's hope had now been running for over 15 years. What started as a few words in a journal had become a bright flame that lit the way for thousands of orphaned children. They had built schools, given scholarships, and created engineering programs where kids could dream big. He still remembered the first girl to receive a scholarship. Her eyes had shined with excitement as she built her first robot. Now she was the chief engineer at the company, a brilliant young woman who had come from Malachi's hope. She was one of many young talents who had risen from that dream. They hadn't just survived. They were changing the world, one circuit, one idea at a time. His grandfather's tech company, now under Alexander's leadership, continued to fulfill its promise. Innovation for the greater good. The boardroom was filled with young engineers, many who had once been orphans like him. They shared bold ideas that often left him speechless. And every time he looked at them, he saw traces of his grandfather, his kind smile, his steady eyes. Alexander still drove the old truck. He still lived simply on the farm, even though he could buy anything he wanted. But to him, real wealth wasn't about money. It was about the children. It was about helping them find their light. That was the legacy he and his grandfather had built together. He ran his fingers over the silver ring again. The word legacy still felt sharp after all those years. It reminded him that no matter how painful the past had been, he had chosen to rise. He had chosen to love. He had chosen to carry on. And someday soon, he would pass the ring to his own son, when he was ready.